Thank you for coming today. I'm Jackie Edwards Walton, and I'm one of the facilitators for the forum. Here we have Laura McCletty, who's also a facilitator, Saritha Cheryl, raise your hand, Saritha, Natalie McElrath, Steve Johnston, who handles technology. And let me go back to Natalie. Natalie also does the hospitality, and she's the timekeeper. Persons will have 30 seconds to ask a question, and you have 1 minute to answer. We also have Charlene Ivory Canty and Mary Johnson. What we will do to get started is we will have prayer with Saritha.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the forum and welcome to National Women's Month. Bow your heads as we pray together. Dear Heavenly Father, we pray today that the simple blessings of this month's mission and occasion, the month to celebrate women, will bring joy to each of you as you celebrate this month. As our team members' wishes, I surveyed each of them since I've been here this morning and asked them, who has the woman been in their lives? Who has influenced them best and most? Unanimously, we decided, because that was going to be my choice, our mothers. And now we know how we got the strong black woman title. Our mothers were strong black women. God, remember our nation. Yes, these United States. Remember our leaders. Remember our children everywhere, all the time. Remember our state, our county, our city, and our neighborhoods. It's in your Son Jesus' name we pray this morning. Let us say together. Amen.
I failed to mention another one of our facilitators, Winston Robinson, and a dear young man. We're so happy to have him as a part of the forum. Today we have pioneers, and I'm so happy that they are here. And I think that's really an indication of Ms. Stevenson, since this is our first Tuesday in March, as Saritha indicated, being Women's History Month. We want to know if there's anyone here today who's here for the first time. Okay, if you'll take about 15 seconds, give us your name, what you do here in the city, and who invited you?
Dr. Stain.
If you'd like.
My name is Daphne Crawford. I'm a assistant instructor and student success coach and recruiter at Central Piedmont Community College. So I was introduced to the forums by my supervisor.
And who's your supervisor?
Sheena Ashley.
Sheena Ashley.
Yes.
So then, welcome. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you.
As I mentioned earlier, we will have question and answers after y'all give a 3-minute presentation to tell us a little bit about yourself. And we'll then have questions and answers after that. And I will recognize a person who has a question. You'll have 30 seconds to ask a question. You'll have about a minute to answer the question. And we'll go from there. So let's start alphabetical order. That you did?
I think so.
Okay.
Either me. That's
or
right. Yeah. Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm very happy to be here with you this morning. Thank you for the invitation. Jackie, it's so good to see so many of you. So many of my good friends, Miss Ivory, who just came in, who would normally be calling me to make sure that I was here. My husband, of course, in the back, who drove me to make sure I got here on time. And then to be in the presence of Charlene and B. I said it was a little bit like a reunion. My name is Debbie Mann Gibbs, and I am a resident of Charlotte, or actually of Matthews. I have been here since 1974. And the reason that I am here is because of my previous career. I started at WBTV in January of 1975 after working at The Observer for a month in December of 1974, shortly after getting married. My husband and I moved here from St. Louis, which is my hometown, and I had worked in the media there. I was a newspaper reporter, and then and I also worked on the weekend at what was one of the CBS owned and operated stations at KMOX as a writer and a film editor on the weekend. So when I came here, I started at The Observer and then got recruited to go to work at WBTV, and that's a story for another time. So I think that's my 3 minutes. I'll be happy to answer any questions. I guess I should say that after I left the station, I did a number of things. I worked at Eastern Airlines with Carlene. I sold real estate. And for 24 years, I'm probably most proud of the work that I did working for an organization, Life Share of the Carolinas, trying to encourage people to become organ donors. And so I retired from there in 2018. And I'm enjoying retirement for the most part and looking forward now that the COVID is a little bit less than what it was, to be able to travel and to get out a little bit and to spend more time in the community and spend more time with friends.
I learned a lot just now. Again, I'd like to say good morning as well and welcome to everyone. Haven't seen Carlene either in a long, many of you in here. And thank you again, Jackie, for my friend B, for the invitation to be here this morning. I had to pull out a few notes just for my own memory on what happened so long ago. But I moved to Charlotte in 1979, November of 1979. I came to Charlotte from Buffalo, New York, and I came here after I completed my education at University of Buffalo for undergrad and University of Syracuse at the SI Newhouse School of Communications with my master's degree, and needed a job. I fell in love with the South, the clean air, the Southern hospitality when I had visited some family in Salisbury, and God blessed me to get a job at WBTV in 1979 as a news reporter trainee. So I didn't get to work with Debbie, but I met one of my best friends in life right here. So when they said pioneers, in some ways, I guess I could be in that group, but there were always people before me. And I want to make sure I say that in any position that I've held, there were strong Black women in the presence. So I left the Department of News. I knew that news really wasn't my fit because I'm more of the helper personality, and I was able to move into the Department of Community Affairs, which does things in the community to uplift things going in the community. And I'll never forget the assignment desk one day sent me out for a fire, to cover a fire, and the fire wasn't bad enough for them to cover it, and they seemed disappointed. I didn't have that mindset. I wasn't looking for a bigger fire. And not saying that all news people do, but community affairs was my fit. So I moved into the public affairs, community affairs department at WBTV, where I was a producer, writer, helped develop a children's program back then. I don't know if any of you remember the name Lunas McGlowan. He was very well known in Charlotte. I worked with him on the children's show. And then some things happened where I didn't think were totally fair, and I left and got the opportunity to move to become the public affairs director at WCCB, Channel 18. Prior to my arrival there was Vivian Nibbins, who many of you may know. She called me and said, Charlene, I'm leaving. I'm going to head up the African American Culture Center. Are you interested? I interviewed, and again, I was blessed with that position. And during that time, I had a public affairs talk show I had a series where we used children that we would call Keeping You in Touch with Kids. They would be 30-second spots on the air dealing with all kinds of topics. And I produced a series called Keeping You in Touch with Charlotte, where again, I would go around the community and talk about things going on. I did a lot of workshops to help educate the public about how to utilize the media, because a lot of people just didn't know. How do you get your message on? How do you put it together? How do you send it out? And then after that, 1994, I should have told you the years, but 1994, 93 and 4, I worked as public relations director for Barbara Scotia College for a short time. After that, I was blessed again to be able to become a consultant for the Charlotte Observer. I don't know if any of you remember the series called Taking Back Our Neighborhoods, but it was a major thing that happened in Charlotte because it was the first time newspaper, radio, and television partnered together on one project, together, not competing, to lift up neighborhoods in this city to help tell the real story and hear from people directly. So that was probably the most rewarding project I've ever worked on in my life because it made a difference. You can go back and visit some of those neighborhoods now and see that there have been changes. And so much of it goes to community leadership, which a lot of you, everybody in here, I know you wouldn't be here if you weren't active in some way in this community. So during those years, there were also intermittent opportunities where I served as an adjunct professor at UNCC and CBCC and Johnson C. Smith. And I feel like my 3 minutes may be up, so I'm going to stop. But I did a lot of other stuff in the community, and I just feel blessed to be here. Did I go over?
No, because she will not.
You were fine.
She went under, so I let you go over. You got the 6 minutes. No, because normally she will not talk about herself or tell you the things that she's done. I think we all know quiet people go about the business of getting the work done. I would be the one running off at the mouth. My name is Beatrice Thompson. Most people just know me as B. Charlotte is home. I grew up here. I've seen the city change. The changes that I saw growing up as a child were very much instrumental in me deciding that I wanted to go into broadcasting, because nobody was telling us what everybody else already knew. And we only got a chance to react. We never got a chance to act. And in my mind, the only way you get to act is if you know what's going on. So I traced my getting into broadcasting, being a child living in 3rd Ward, down the street from Good Sam Hospital, and coming home from school one day in the spring of '64, and I saw paper on everybody's door, and I didn't know what it was. And the rent company, Watts Realty, had gone through the entire neighborhood and posted on everybody's door that they had 30 days to move. Did not say where we were going to move or how we were going to move, but you had to get up out of there, and you got 30 days to do it. That was my introduction to urban removal and everything that it entailed. The first scholarship I ever got was in '64 to learn how to play a clarinet, and it was at 2nd Ward High School. You couldn't have told me nothing as a little kid. I got to walk from my home near Good Sam and walk to Brooklyn and go to 2nd Ward High School and sit there and watch all these black people with instruments playing music. And I was going to learn how to play music. But then that was taken away. When we moved, we became the second black family to move in the York Road Park. That's where I saw a cross burned in somebody's front yard the first time in my life in the 5th grade, because someone did not want a Native American son to date a white girl at South Mecklenburg High School. So that was my introduction to what civil rights was supposed to be about and about moving. I learned about realtors doing blockbusting by putting one black family in a neighborhood and then going to all the white families and saying, you better sell now because they're coming, and realizing that we were the family that was placed there to do that. All of that impacted who I was as a young black girl trying to figure out what my life was supposed to be. I didn't like my voice growing up because I thought I sounded like a little boy and everybody else sounded like little girls. And so I didn't want my voice recorded. And yet, Holy Spirit let me see that my biggest asset was the fact that I had a voice that could project over anyone. I had been in news conferences with national reporters, and I could get my question answered because I could project my voice further than they could project theirs. And I could enunciate well enough that whoever was far enough away from me could understand what I was saying, so they'd answer my question. But then there was the drawback, because so many times intelligent little girls, black girls in particular, got picked on for all kinds of different things, that maybe we weren't pretty enough. You the ugly one. What you gonna do when you grow up? Ain't nobody never gonna marry you. Well, I will tell you this. My belief in who I was as a black person began when James Brown did the song Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. That song became a mantra for me. It really, truly did. I went on to finish school here in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. One of my greatest things of going to that university was my grandmother worked for a doctor in Lockhart, South Carolina. She'd been a maid in their house for more than 20-some years. And the woman who was there, the wife, told my grandmother one day, she said, well, Annabelle, do you know that my granddaughter is dating a young man who attends the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill? And Big Mama looked at her and said, well, my grandbaby go to Chapel Hill. She won't just date somebody, she go there. So if I did nothing else, I gave my Big Mama bragging rights for that. Ultimately coming to BTV in 77 after finishing at Chapel Hill. And by 79, I got a chance to work with Debbie for a little bit because she was there when I got there. She had already cracked that ground. But when I got there, and 2 years later, I was asked if I would anchor the morning news. So I became the first black woman to anchor television here in Charlotte. I stayed at BTV through 85 and then got an offer from Duke Power and had Mr. Lee, Bill Lee, to come and visit me at Duke because they asked me if I was interested in being a corporate spokesperson for Duke, and became the only black person who was a corporate spokesperson for Duke Power at that particular time. I stayed there for 2.5 years, and it was wonderful. But mine was, I like to tell people stories. I couldn't sit up in I had a nice corner office. I had a secretary. I had a company car. I was bored to tears. I had to come up out of there because it was not allowing me to grow and to tell the stories that I'd gotten in the broadcasting for in the first place. I got back into the business at CNC, stayed there for 11 years until they decided they wanted younger blondes. And I was an old black broad. Except the community that I loved backed me up and said, we love you, you are ours. We will not let you fight that battle by yourself. When I got out of television, I got into radio and became the News and Public Affairs Director for CBS Radio, for WPEG and WBAB, and won my national awards for radio, the Crystal Awards. Only stations at the top of their markets get those, and we won them for community affairs for Charlotte, for PEG, and with BAB with national mention. I've been technically, officially retired since 2016. Reality, I still do stories with PBS Charlotte because it keeps my hand in the game, and it keeps me aware of things happening in my city. And when I see things that I don't think is correct, or someone comes in and says, well, this about Charlotte, I'm going, no, baby, come here, let's have a word for it. Let me help you to understand something. So this city means a lot to me, and I will stop there because I'm sure y'all got some questions to ask all of us about broadcasting and black women who started this stuff in the 70s.
You ought to mention that.
Yeah, I guess I failed to mention that I was the first black female in Charlotte television. There were 2 black men at the TV station when I arrived, Ken Kuntz and John Blunt. And many of you all may not know that John Blunt was the first black male anchor in Charlotte. I think he started anchoring maybe in 75 or 76. And he's, has since gone on to other stations. So I had no idea when I started that I was the first. Nobody told me. I didn't ask. I know I sometimes got crappy assignments, but, it didn't occur to me why. I just did whatever I was assigned to do, and it took me a while to, I think, to prove myself and to finally get some decent assignments. And so by the time B came along, it was really nice to have another face in the newsroom, to have another Black woman.
But she cracked it so that I could get in there. And that's what people forget sometimes. Somebody had to crack it first. For a seed to get in the ground, and it's hard ground, somebody got to crack it first.
And Vanessa Baxter named her.
Yeah, and Vanessa Baxter, who was also from Charlotte. Vanessa and I both ultimately.
And then there was Claire. I can't remember.
Claire Lowry.
Claire Lowry. Yeah.
Claire was in community affairs.
Exactly. Yeah. That's one thing I have to say, not just because I work there, but WBTV really has been pretty good about pioneering and putting Black people on the air probably earlier than any of the other stations in, significant roles. I mean, and if you look, Steve Crump is still a jewel that is still there.
And you will see that for those in particular, at BTV in particular, I always thought it was interesting. BTV used to have a Black advisory board.
That's right.
That's right. And Sarah Stevenson was on it.
Yes,
And Sarah was on it.
Yes,
That's right.
And what they wanted us to do was, the average news story would be a minute, 30 seconds, or almost 2 minutes. What we had then. Now they don't get that kind of time for a story. And they would say, be in your story. And I got called in by my news director one day, and I thought, I done messed up. They finna get rid of me now. And he wanted to know why I was not showing myself in my stories. And I said, because I don't have that much time, and I'm trying to tell the story. I need the time for the story. He said, no, you don't understand. We need to see your face. They needed to make sure that the community saw, because people would say, you don't sound like you Black. Okay, how are we supposed to sound? So they need to see your face so that they would know that we have hired another Black person who is on the air. Ultimately, you needed to understand, though, that the power was not for the people who were on the air. The power was sitting back there with the assignment desk, the executive producers, the people who were deciding what we're going to cover that particular day. Because there were times when, I felt like I was spitting in a typhoon. You're trying to argue for a story that should go on the air. And you got, towards the end of my career, I'm seeing a lot of young white guys in their mid-20s or so deciding that, well, really, it's about computers. I'm going, no, baby, it's about people losing their houses. You got to balance this out. It can't be the fluff news all the time. It's got to be the news that's making a community that's impacting it. For me, that was a frustration level, because I saw that happen too much.
And it still goes on today. B and I talk about that often, about how times have changed now, and it's so much more about the looks, paying salary less, not about the content of what's being presented. And I'm not saying this just because she's one of my best friends. B is one of the most brilliant writers, period, whether it's Charlotte or any city. And I just always felt the media here has never truly appreciated her brilliance.
I would agree with that. B is, you don't find a reporter that's more solid than B.
Mm-mm.
And I remember I always admired her deep voice. My voice is a lot deeper than it used to be, and it was from being on television. I learned early on that I couldn't go on with a high-pitched voice. And so I worked at it until I got mine down. And I notice now sometimes when I make calls, people will say, yes, sir, how can we help you?
Yeah, well, I get that one. When I'm talking to somebody on the phone, they haven't done what I thought, I take a moment and stop. And I'll say it again. They say, yes, sir, and you know you're talking to a woman. A very distinct woman. Yes, ma'am. Wait a minute. Oh, I'm sorry.
I think that it is wonderful to have this interaction among the pioneers here. That's a special moment there to just hear how you just piggyback on one another. We're going to start with questions right now. And Tanya, good to see you.
Yeah, I had to go.
Absolutely.
Had to go.
Absolutely. And Tanya, you're in the 90s, right?
Yes.
Okay. Good to have you. Our first question will be Natalie.
Not to scare you, but we raise our hand and we have a question. She calls us and.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Raise her hand. I had raised mine earlier. B, I'm curious. I grew up in corporate America, and every job that I started with a wig because I had an afro, and they did not like afros back in the day. And then when I finished my 90-day, what do you call it?
Probation.
Probation period. Then on the 91st day, I went in without the wig. Did you have an afro at the time that you started in television?
That was a major discussion about what you would do or could do with your hair. Because I did have my hair in a fro to some extent, but you remember when everybody had jerry curls? Did that for a hot minute. But it was always a question about Black women and hair and what you were going to do with your hair. Yeah, and having a fro was not necessarily accepted for you to do with your hair. You needed to have a perm or something because you were trying to fit in with wherever. It wasn't your own individual style at that point because we were so new in getting people of color on the air that you were going along with the mores that were thrown at you. And with contracts and stuff, I had contracts at BTV and contracts at CNC. They could tell you what you could wear. They had wardrobe consultants. You know, they had a wardrobe consultant who had me in all these pale pastels. I'm like, nah, I'm a jewel colors kind of person. You're trying to make me look like the blonde who looks good in pastels. I don't look good in pastels, but that's who they had hired to do that. So yeah, there was a sense of uniformity and not individuality.
I guess to put it in context, I didn't think about mentioning it earlier. When we started, women in broadcasting were still pretty new, or in the media period. I mean, people like Connie Chung and Barbara Walters and some of the other people that you're familiar with at the national level, they were new. And B had a really good comment earlier when we were talking before you guys arrived. And she reminded me that when we were working, there were no women in the newsroom who were married or who had children. The guys did. The male reporters had wives. They had families. Because I remember on Christmas, we would have to work the morning, and then the guys could be off that in the morning so they could spend the holiday morning with their kids. And then we would have the afternoons off. And of course, that's why I left the station in 1978, was because I got pregnant and had a son. And, you know, that just wasn't heard of.
Yeah, because all the male reporters could be married, and if they moved to another station, their wives would go. There was no concern about their careers. But for us, it was like if you got married and your husband didn't want to go along with, what if you got an offer to be an anchor in another state?
Well, I did get an offer to go to Atlanta, but Bobby wasn't going to, close his practice for me to go to Atlanta. So
it wasn't until late 80s, early 90s that I started seeing women who could get a job maybe as an anchor somewhere and their spouses were willing to go with them. It was always up to that point, the wife would leave her job and follow her husband, even if she'd been in broadcasting, she's doing well, but you followed his instead of following yours. And most of the women did not. I didn't have my daughter until I was 37 years old. But so many women in the business, women were forced to make a choice as to how you were going to do this.
And many of them didn't have families at all as a result.
Okay, Laura?
My question is for all three of you. Share with us one of the best experiences that you've had in that position and one of the worst. And if it's centered around racism or prejudice, can you share with us, each one of you, if you can think of anything? If you can't think of anything.
That's interesting is when I was, we used to have a beat, and every reporter had a beat. You covered health, you covered the county commission, you covered education, whatever your beat was. Police, I covered education, county commission, and the police beat. That was definitely interesting because I had to read the police reports every day. But anyway, I remember doing a story when I was covering the county commission. I had to go to the meetings every Tuesday, and they would start like I think at 1 or 2 o'clock. And back then we had to produce 2 stories a day. We didn't have any repeats like you see on television today. You know, whatever we had at 6, it was not necessarily repeated at 11. So anyway, I had to go to the county commission. I'd sit through the meetings, and Bob Walton was on the county commission at the time, along with a white guy named Bill Boo. And they would sit there and they would go back and forth, and I can tell you stories about how 485 got to be where it is now, because I sat through those meetings. But anyway, the thing that was, I thought, awful is Bill Boo and Bob Walton didn't like each other. And I'm not sure if they didn't like each other or if they would, I'm not sure. But anyway, I don't think they liked each other. So at lunchtime, they would take a break, you know, and so Bill Boo would ask Bob, was he going to have chitlins while they were on their break? And Bob would ask him, was he going to have raccoon or whatever it was? I mean, it was just ridiculous. You know, and, you know, I couldn't report on it. You know, I'm just sitting there thinking, wow, this is crazy. So that was something that kind of stuck out in my mind. And I guess when I think about another interesting thing that was on a more positive side, and I don't know why, as I was driving over, I thought about this, is B said we were the ones, of course, that covered all of the stories in the Black community. And I remember something was going on one evening when I first started at the Observer. Harvey Gantt had just been appointed to the city council. And I remember I had to interview Cindy because they had just allowed women to join the city club. But then one evening, something was going on in the community, and we wanted to get a reaction, or I wanted to get a reaction because then I was working nights. And I remember going over to Mr. Coleman's house, L.C. Coleman, over on Beattysport Road. And he was so gracious. He came out in his robe on his porch. And, you know, we had those really bright lights. And he's standing there allowing me to interview him as he stands in his robe talking about whatever it was. So, you know, there were good and bad. But people in the community, when I think about it, they were very supportive of us. As Bea mentioned, I think they wanted us to succeed.
Very good stories. I wanted to mention, I've kind of rushed myself at the end because before I totally retired, and I guess it's really debatable what you call retirement. I was doing freelance writing for the Observer during my final really years of doing some work, and I did community columns. And you talk about what's the best and worst. Doing community columns, I stopped doing that in 2015. That was very rewarding, and as well as the majority of my career, as I said, was in community affairs. So to say a best is hard to quantify because there were so many best. When somebody would say, thank you for helping get the word out about my organization, or thank you for, you know, making a difference. So those are the things you can't put a price on. But in terms of worst, I alluded to briefly earlier at WBTV when I left from the public affairs department, something had happened and I went and talked to Julius Chambers about it because I thought I might have a case and the way I had been treated. And he was so profound. If any of you know him, he helped me understand that sometimes organizations can do right up to the legal line and it's okay. And you can't do anything about it. So that, I would say, was probably one of my worst. But also back during that time, I went and talked to Harvey Gantt. Before, I don't know if he was mayor or not, but I was telling him about how things, you know, challenges that you deal with in this industry. And he made a good point that came to fruition. He says, Charlene, what we need in Charlotte is more young African-American professionals. So don't leave, because I was thinking about leaving as well. And thank God, I didn't leave. And then I met my husband, who will be celebrating 35 years, March 26th this month. And he was from Buffalo as well. Thank you, because it's how, it's a blessing, but our marriages take work. And we've been blessed with a daughter, and I have a stepson, and he has 2 children, wife and 2 children. So I've just been blessed. So when you think back on what was not the best, it doesn't compare to the blessings.
Right.
She was gonna miss that blessing. He wanted to take her out to dinner and came back and she was like, I don't want to go out to dinner with him. He's from Buffalo. I can come all the way to Charlotte. Ain't nobody from Buffalo. I'm like, it's a free meal. Go.
And she was in my wedding, so good to tell that part. It's going on YouTube.
Oh,
and
that's
stuff.
true. But that was a good,
Yeah.
and y'all good and bad. I think a lot of what I did was working out in counties, and I would have to go out to 2 stories a day. And I would be in Lincoln County in the morning and in Union County in the evening. And I went to a story up in, I'm trying to remember if it was Lincoln or Iredell County, both of those counties were hotbeds for the KKK. And there were training camps for people who wanted to do paramilitary stuff. Went up to do a story with this gentleman who was also in government. There was no question in my mind that he was a Klan member. He refused to speak to me. He refused to acknowledge me. He talked to my photographer, who was very uncomfortable because this young white guy was like, I'm not in charge of the story. She's in charge of the story. And he literally told me, and I just stood there and looked at him because I'm thinking, don't talk to me, Junior. I get the last word on this. This story goes on the air or doesn't go on the air the way I write it. And I learned years ago, I didn't have to make people look foolish. I let them use their own words to make themselves look foolish. I just pulled a sound bite that you said. So I didn't make you say anything. You said that on your own. And I think so often for us as journalists and reporters, something can really get to you, but it's how do I take myself out of this and make sure that I bring all the information? A similar thing happened with a young lady who I think her family was part of the John Birch Society or something. She lived down in Waxhaw, very anorexic looking. She lived with her parents, but she was against abortion. And she didn't think any child should ever die. And I'm looking at her and I'm going, you've not had a child. You've not had to work hard for nothing. You get everything that you want. Your mom and dad are going to cover you to the day you die. But you will stand here and keep a woman who knows her life is about to change and never be the same again. But you don't want her to be in control of her life. I had my hand on the back of the chair. I'm scraping the chair. The photographer's shooting, and all of a sudden I feel something grab my hand. Because I'm trying my best not to tell this young lady, you are the craziest person I have ever met. And you're trying to lead a charge against women who don't have any other options. So how do I tell the story? To tell her side, how she sees it, but to tell the side of the women who need this help. That to me is a challenge for journalists. And I would say to all of you, be very aware of these people who think that they are journalists and who are on social media, that's up to the line of what's legal and not legal, because as journalists, we must adhere to some standards as to what you do. You can't just say something and not be able to substantiate it. These people who are out here on social media going, well, it's my opinion. Well, opinions are like elbows in a bungle. Everybody got one or two. But that doesn't mean that your opinion is fact. Did you base that in fact if you're passing that along as news and information? And you have to be careful where you get that from. The happiest moment for me, in front of county commission, one of them, Jerry Blackman was one of the county commissioners, and they were getting ready to make a decision on the budget. My photographer had not gotten there yet. And I was like, can y'all just wait? I need this vote on air. Jerry looked at me and said, well, B, if you want us to wait, you're going to have to sing. I broke into Bessie Smith. Up in Harlem every Saturday night when the highbrows get together, it's just and I just kept singing, give me a pig foot and a bottle of beer. By the time I got to the end of the song, the photographer was coming in. We got to sing. But I had to sing.
Yeah, you do what you have to do.
You do what you have to do.
But I do remember, B, now that you mentioned that, I remember going to the Myers Park Country Club to interview Ann Landers was in town for some reason. And I remember they wouldn't let me go into the ballroom or wherever she was speaking. I had to wait until she finished. And then I could interview her outside of that area. And I remember we had a black reporter. His name was Lester, and I don't remember his last name.
Lester Strong?
Yeah. And they sent him down to, there was a swim club way out Wilkinson Boulevard. And there was somebody that was in Charlotte that was training for the Olympics. And the assignment desk told Lester to go down to do the interview with the guy, to get in the pool and to swim with him. But of course, they wouldn't let Lester in the pool.
That pool is right before 85 goes over Wilkinson Boulevard. There's like a trailer park place there before you get to all of the Amazon stuff. And to keep black people from swimming in that pool, they feel the instinct.
So there were indignities that were involved.
Until B mentioned it, I've had some of those cases too where the person didn't want to talk to me, but wanted to talk to the photographer. But, you know.
And that's a whole nother story that would be interesting to hear from some of the guys that were photographers back in the day, and to some of the people that were in the sales department, the Kathy Rideau,
Yes.
who was probably the first black woman here in sales, and Rita Little Scott, who became a general manager. You know, there are a lot of, people think of just people that are on the air that they see, but they don't always think about the people who are, behind the scenes. And if you really wanted to know where the money is, if there are any young people watching and they're interested in careers in media, I'd advise them to go into the business part, to go into sales. That's where the money is. If you could go to the parking lot and look at the cars, you can see the reporters had, just regular old cars in the sales department. They had all the fancy ones. So, I mean, it's something that people don't think about, but it is another element of the media that would be interesting, I think, for you guys to hear.
That is so good.
And that's also where all management for media comes from,
Right.
out of sales.
Yeah.
And Kathy was in human resources at one time because she interviewed me when I came to Charlotte.
Wow.
We learning stuff too while we
Yeah, how about that?
Well, this is and he's videotaping this, so you can always go back to our website and direct people to this.
Gary?
Yeah. Appreciate it. This be you spoke on personally growing up experiencing urban renewal or removal rather here in Charlotte. And I guess the question belongs to all three of you when I say, since then, how do you see much of that still being the same in Charlotte, or the ripple effects still having a stifling effect on
The ripple effect still has that effect, and I will say gentrification is a nice way of urban removal. Because now you just tax somebody out of their houses, or the grandkids out of that house. Or, it bothers me when I have a good friend whose brother was on the police force here in Charlotte. She is a Delta strong North Carolina Central grad. We went to the high school together here in Charlotte, lives on Wilmore Drive. Family has lived there since 1967, I think. And she lives there now, is caretaker for her father. Young Caucasian woman comes down the street, looks at Marsha and goes, "Oh, did you just move here?" Marsha is a good religious woman. She was about to become like me, because she said, all of a sudden, there are people moving in my neighborhood and looking at me like, "Oh, you can afford to move here?" Honey, she was here before you thought about moving here, before you thought that the neighborhood needed to be changed. I'm looking at our home church, Greater Galilee Baptist, which is off of Cliffwood, there in the Wilmore neighborhood. And Galilee moved there and became an anchor for that neighborhood, so the neighborhood didn't fall apart completely. as the gentrification has come in, there are folk who wanted the church to stop parking on the street on Sundays because they're parking in front of my house. And this is just an inconvenience. And they went to older Black homeowners on Wilmore Drive and said, isn't it an inconvenience for you that all these cars are here every Sunday and you can't get out of your driveway? You know, we can petition the city to get them to stop doing this. Where were y'all when that community was getting ready to die completely? And nobody was investing in that community, but the church did. The church could have pulled out of there and left. Look at the communities, Black communities in Charlotte now where there are large churches. And some of them are like, oh, we're going to have to move out of here. We're not going to be able to stay here. So I'm seeing that impact in communities. I said in 2016 on a show on PBS that if you live in Charlotte and you made less than $50,000, you're not going to be able to stay here. You're wondering why the transportation is going the way it is because you're going to have to move to Gastonia, to Concord, and to Lancaster because you're not going to be able to stay in Charlotte. If there's a good transit system, you can catch the train to come into Charlotte to work, but you will not be able to afford to stay here. Look at the number of apartments that are being built. Those aren't being built for people who live here. If you start at $1,200 for a studio apartment, who can afford to stay there? You're building for people who are transient. They're here because of the banks. They'll be gone when that contract is up. Then who's going to move into those high-price apartments? And you pushed out all the people who had lived here before. It's a storm that's getting worse and worse. I'm concerned that our local elected officials aren't looking at that, and they keep saying, well, the private sector can help. No, you were elected, and you keep using my tax dollars, and you keep giving breaks to people who are building things that folks who live here can't afford. So it's not going to be a city that we knew. It's going to be a city of somebody else that I don't know.
And to piggyback on that, where are all the people going?
Yeah.
All the people that have been disenfranchised and had moved, that's my question. Where are you going? So I have deep concerns. It's not just Charlotte either. It's across this entire country.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. It's like you said, B, it's urban renewal or removal has now become gentrification, and you see it all over the city. And it's not just Charlotte. I mean, any major city that you go to is experiencing the same thing. And I wish I knew what the answer was. If I did, I'd be a millionaire, I'm sure.
Okay.
I have a question.
Okay.
You will see now that from when you were at the desk, about the difference between now and then, as they are in the same vein we're talking about the removal, urban removal, that they're using the media to do the same thing to form that, to shape their story to get out. So we're not getting true information anymore. You know that you all were probably under the strictest of ethics. You talked, everything had to be correct, but now everything is spun, not an English major, but whichever one of those fit, to get their story out, to force their narrative on us. We know right now that in Charlotte that our infrastructure can't afford any more building right now at our current rate. But we're still, you go out Mallard Creek, 500-600 apartments coming at a time, and they're filled as soon as they're filled. Not concerned. The highway, 2-lane highway, we can't sustain that. But we won't hear about that on the news media. Just like now, also, the thing that really gets me is a news station that completely lies about everything. There's no fact checking or no truth to it. How do you all feel about when you hear a news story? Now I ain't gonna call the station out because it could be any of them.
Well, I was hoping somebody would raise that issue because it's one of the things that bothers me the most. When we were reporters, a million years ago, we did have standards and you had to be objective. I mean, can't even remember that we could even declare a political affiliation. I think I was an independent for a while just because you could not show any bias. And if we presented something from the Republicans, there was also going to be a Democratic side that was presented. And what we put on the air was fact. We don't, there were only three major networks back then, CBS, NBC, and ABC. There was no Fox. There was no CNN. And so you could not tell by which station you were watching what the bias was going to be as you can now. I have to say that I think that the three major networks still do a pretty good job of being objective in their news coverage. But the thing about, as you, I think, have alluded to, is it's not just what's always on the news, but what gets selected to be on the news and who is it that's making those decisions. And so that's, again, back to the point of we need people in other positions besides on-air talent. You need people who are in decision-making roles who can help determine what those stories are that are actually going to be covered and how they're going to be covered or presented.
And I think we're in danger when facts don't matter. And I'm saying that for this country. And the world has changed so much since we have left the industry. With all the technology now and the websites and things that people use for their media, some people don't even watch any network to get their news feed. And if facts don't matter, I see that as a problem, a serious problem, and also opinions. Because someone is telling you their opinion about a situation, that's dangerous. And I know you know what you kind of asked and answered your own question, but yes.
And it is about, that's what I was alluding to earlier, that we see more opinion-based information that's pushed out and not fact.
It's infotainment, too.
Infotainment.
Yes, exactly.
And whoever can be the most offensive, then you can get people who think in that same mindset about, yeah, should have been said something like that. So now you found your tribe, per se, and they got a camera.
And truth doesn't matter.
And truth doesn't matter. This is what I believe. And see, it's true. See, she said it too. That doesn't make it true just because somebody else said it too. You haven't been able to back it up with fact. And that was something I always said to my child growing up. Back it up with facts. You substantiate it. You got to tell me where you got that from. And then I can believe it. But if you can't tell me where you got that information from, why should I believe what you're saying?
Okay. Well, it's kind of like we're having fireside chat. Rosalind,
Okay.
then Vivian,
Sorry.
Saritha, and then me.
And then me.
I'm wondering if the three of you watch local news, and if you do, what you think about local news these days.
Well,
Turn the camera off.
right. No, I still do. I watch the news every day. And I still watch WBTV. And I think that they do a reasonably good job. I don't think it's as biased as some of the other stations. One of the things that, and again, just being objective, one of the things I did like about BT is their stories are more news-based as opposed to one of the other stations that does more sensational stories. We used to say if it bleeds, it leads. So I think locally the stations, the major networks, the CBS, the NBC, and the ABC stations still do a decent job. I don't know what you guys think.
Locally, I flip between ABC and NBC for local and for nat. It's just, I think it's our personal choices. And I think also I just wanted to add the importance of reading. No matter what you see on broadcast media, it's important to read newspapers as well and other sources of information. There's another thing I was going to say related to your question. I've mentioned it to Debbie and B before we all sat here. I am pleased with the fact that Charlotte has a good number of African American people who are anchors and positions that matter. Being from Buffalo, New York, whenever I visit Buffalo, it is not the same. And that's a statement to me. So that we still have a long way to go across this country about equality as it is on camera and all the things that happen behind the camera and in the business office as well. I don't know what your choices are.
I don't watch a lot of local news. I watch some on SOC, but I look at the reporters. I look at different reporters, and you can tell the reporter's bias by how they report their stories. And you can tell which ones are trying to get the story to put on their escape tape, is what we used to call it. What's going to look good on that tape to get you to the next best market. What always bothered me about that is that's somebody's life you're talking about, that you are fixing to put on your tape, and you didn't tell their story maybe as well as you should have. I think that journalists should follow something similar to the Hippocratic Oath. I've always said this, and I'll continue to say it, that in the process of doing your job, you will do no harm or do as little harm as possible to get the information out there. Not this family where the child was abused and local officials say the child was taken once before. So now you're looking at this family and you've condemned the whole family. I want you to stop sensationalizing a story that'll look good on your reel, but those people still have to live and deal with the aftermath of what. Why do some people say they don't want to talk to journalists? That's why. I've been in situations where journalists would walk up to somebody and ask them a question, and they've had family members to die, or they're screaming in pain, and you're telling the photographer to get that. I'm sorry, I can't do that. There's a different way I can tell this story without exacerbating their pain. So that concerns me. And I'm with Price. I have to read stuff. I read from all different areas. I look at different shows. My child gets on me about mine. Come out of the news world. That's not your world anymore.
Well, I think we're all still news.
Yeah.
junkies. I mean, I still subscribe to 2 papers every day.
And we all
I'm
need to
junkie.
stay curious. Everybody needs to stay curious in life.
So you got to do that.
I think she had a question.
Okay, we'll come back to it. Rosalind, Vivian. Thank you.
I was just wondering, what are your role models when you were starting out? Your role models, who you looked up to?
Well, growing up in St. Louis, there was a black woman named Diane White. And, I grew up, in the 50s, 60s. And Diane worked at the NBC affiliate, and she was the weather girl. So for whatever reason, I was always impressed watching her. And I don't know that I ever thought I'd be a weather girl. But, certainly I remember her as a role model, because you just really didn't see many black people on TV. And I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll move on.
We talked about role models a little bit before you got here, but a lot of women in my life, from my mother, people in the church, and my life. But there's one situation that impacted me when I was in grad school in Syracuse. I was working on a documentary for the Urban League in Syracuse, and I had to go to the head of the Urban League's home to interview her for a project. And her husband had beat her home. He was a dentist. He had dinner cooking, washing clothes, taking care of the child. I said, now that's what I think works. When you have a partnership, when you are a team. So even though that didn't have anything to do with my work directly, having a supportive person in your life, that made an impact on me.
Mr. John Montgomery, my 8th grade teacher at York Road. Mr. Montgomery had polio and was in a wheelchair, but he was one of the most highly respected teachers at that school. He was also a coach for the boys' basketball team and for the football team, and they would lift his wheelchair and take him wherever we needed to go, put him on that bus. But Mr. Montgomery had a belief in civics and local and government and politics. He ingrained that into me. My parents were working class. They were not part of the movement in the 60s. They were just trying to hold down a job. But Mr. Montgomery was the one who said to me, understand how this government works. Pay attention to this. And that's what I did.
Thank you. Saritha?
Yes, good morning, and thank you guys for coming. Yeah, I've always been a fan. I'm your number one fan that you don't know about. It's because she always states facts. And now I know how she gets them. But my question to each of you is very simple. What is the role of your producers, and what role do they play in determining which stories get to the public?
Well, back when we were in the newsroom, there were no producers. There was an assignment desk, and you had a managing editor, and you had a person who would determine what stories you were going to cover that day. And you were responsible also for developing some of your own stories. Back then, we didn't even always have a cameraman. Sometimes we had to shoot our own film, and we all had an old Bell and Howell film camera that we carried in the trunks of our cars. And I still remember one morning Ken Coombs calling me about 5 o'clock and saying, I want you to go over on Albemarle Road. It was the wintertime. There's been a lot of accidents over there. You know, there's a lot of ice on the road, and there's all these accidents, and I want you to go over there and cover it. And I said, Ken, I have a new car. And if you think all those other people went on Albemarle Road and they were in an accident, what makes you think I'm not going to be in one? You tell them my phone was off the hook and you call the next person because I'm not going. But anyway, there were no producers back then. You know, we just had to, you know, there were certain stories you knew you had to cover, whatever was going on with county commission, the board of education, and the city council, and then other stories you kind of filled in.
And my time in news was shorter than theirs, but the assignment editor certainly had a lot of power back then. I just also want to give a shout out to back then our African-American photographers, Jan and George.
I was thinking the same thing.
They were having a good photographer mattered.
Yeah.
They helped us in learning how you had to develop an eye because we were on film. 100 feet of film was 1 minute. Yeah, he gave you 300 feet of film in the morning. You got 3 minutes. Mess it up. You don't get no more that day. So you had to learn how to edit in your head as to how you were shooting. So it would cut down on the number of film edits you had to make when you got back. I remember having to drive one of the station wagons to Raleigh to cover a farm tractorcade. And it had inside lights and outside lights, and I got a light meter, and I got this camera, and I'm by myself, and I got to get back to Charlotte before 3 o'clock to drop that film in the soup so it can develop, take it out, edit it, and get it on at 6 o'clock. And no, we didn't have producers then, but ultimately, when I started working at NBC, CNC, you started having producers, and they started micromanaging the stories more as to what would get out. Whereas what Debbie was saying, yeah, we had to go out and get stories. My biggest fear would be to wake up in the morning and not have an idea for a story in my head. I would go through the phone book and look, if there was an interesting name of a business, I'm calling you to find out what do you do. That might be a good story. But once you started having producers in there, they would assign some stories to you, and sometimes you get assigned stuff that didn't make a lot of sense, or it wasn't a good story. But he thought it was going to be a great story that day. And I'm like, oh, Father God, Jesus. So somebody speaking tongues till 9 o'clock in the morning. Because it did not make sense. But that's what you did.
And you better have 2 stories.
Yeah, you better have 2 stories.
And I was just thinking, I didn't say it earlier, but B went to Chapel Hill, and Charlene got her master's from Syracuse, both of which are excellent journalism schools. I want you all to know that I went to Texas Southern and HBCU. So again, for anybody who's watching, you don't have to go to the top journalism schools in the country to be successful.
Very good point. Very good point.
We're going to ask ladies if you could keep your comments, your answers to 1 minute.
Okay.
Because we're near the end.
That's hard for us. I mean, there's a reason we are journalists.
I know it is. We
Okay.
always need
We'll do our
more
best.
time. But Debbie, I wanted to ask you, I remember years ago I read something about how you made a decision to change course. You were doing a story, pregnant, you were in the mountains or something like that. Can you share that with us? And after you finish that, Tanya, I wanted to just give you a minute to, make some remarks.
Okay.
And then we're going to go to Kristen, Laura. I think that's it right now.
Okay, I'll do it in a minute. The story you're talking about was the night that they had a prison fire in Marion. And I was again working nights, and we went up in the mountains and we couldn't get a signal back because we had those big microwave dishes on top of the truck. And it was cloudy that night and we couldn't get a signal. So we drove up and down the parkway, and we were about to run out of gas. Somebody found some place that was open, and we went and woke somebody up at night, and they put gas in the car, and we never could get a signal, so we didn't get home that morning till 5 o'clock. So that didn't help my enjoying my career. But what ultimately made me resign almost on the spot was I was 6 months pregnant, and I went out to do a story, and it was about somebody who had gotten their arm cut off in an industrial machine. So I go there, we pull up to the back of the building. They've got this tall, whatever you call those things, where you have to climb up to get there. Well, I'm 6 months pregnant. There is no stairway. The people obviously don't want me there to cover the story because one of their employees has gotten their arm cut off. So here I am with my big belly trying to climb up with the photographer helping me to get up here on this dock to interview somebody. So I do that story. I leave there, and we're in the station van, and we get a call from the assignment desk saying that there's been another industrial accident, and there is all of this gas in the air, and they want us to go out and cover it. And I'm thinking, I'm pregnant. I don't want to be out where there's something in the air and we don't know what it is or what the effect of it was going to be. So I went back to the station and I turned in my resignation that day. And then, like a lot of reporters, I finished my career as what we call a PR hack. I went into public relations, best job. You can have to work Christmas or New Year's or Thanksgiving.
So Tanya, again, if you'll take a minute to say a little bit about you, and then you had a question.
Yeah, well, I've got to take off because I do radio and I've got to start on air at 10, but I wouldn't pass up the opportunity to come, first of all, and say thank you all because I stand on your shoulders. You paved the way from Debbie, from Charlene, watching you growing up, seeing the best, I felt like with community affairs, just, for you to be able to see someone that you can be. And then, of course, B, has been my mentor. I miss you. I'm so glad to see you all. She taught me so much, not just about the business, but about life. The countless mornings that she's given me advice, even once I had my child. What really is something that we as professionals should come to you all and wish we could get you together more often. You don't see many of us in the room. Maybe it's because of the work and we can't, come over. But as soon as I saw the lineup, I canceled an appointment because I wanted to be here to pull from you and to get this knowledge as I continue doing radio. I do some freelance television and even writing. But I also was talking about in the past, do you guys remember when we had, wasn't it a public affairs show that came on 30 minutes for our community that kind of just addressed our issues? Mm-hmm. Do you think we'll ever get back to that? We see all these shows popping up, and well, I think that we've got to work really hard to try. We've got two black GMs. We've got two black GMs now at two of the stations. I heard you mention the diversity boards. They still have those, but you wouldn't know that. They are also there, and then maybe you would. I guess it just would be a matter of opinion. But I would love for you guys to kind of grade as you see our professionals that come through Charlotte. It's just a stopover now. It appears. And when it comes to the producers, they don't know north side from west side. They'll put everything in West Charlotte, depending on where it's located in the story. But I would kind of want you all to kind of share as you look at our stations here and the quality that we get on a scale of 1 to 10, and how would you rank them overall? Because you all are the best in the business.
I'll just start because they'll have more news comments, but first, thank you for those kind comments because it's really like a distant memory about what I did personally. I had to go look up some stuff because I couldn't remember, but I did one of those community affairs shows, and I think that you don't see them now because back then we had a lot of FCC requirements to be maintained. Things have changed, and those aren't as important anymore. So if it isn't making money, it'll be tough to have that again. I hope stations, and I think our local stations find ways to give back and do things, but I don't know if we'll ever go back to those days of spending that kind of time and money on community affairs. But you all may want to answer the other parts of her question about news.
Oh, no, I don't.
If you look at stations now, most of them don't have a community affairs department. Mm-mm. That is a starting point right there. If you don't even have a department that focuses on the community, that says a lot about the station in and of itself. News operations are the ones that help stations to get bigger. But what we're seeing is, stations, they look at markets. When I started, Charlotte was like the 33rd largest market, 34th or 33rd. We're now in the 20s.
21.
Yeah, we're in 21. So we've grown by about 12, 13 market sizes. So that means there are people who work in smaller markets that want to come to this market so they can get to the bigger markets. This is a medium-sized market. And for the most part, people, when they come to Charlotte, they like being here, living here with their families and stuff, but moving on with your career is a good place because the networks watch this market. A lot of top reporters that went on to networks came out of the Charlotte market. But because, as Charlene pointed out, it's very clear. It's why now you can see advertisements from political. It used to be we had, as Debbie said, we had to balance that. If you had a Republican, you got to have a Democrat. Now with FCC rules being pulled back some, stations aren't held to those guidelines as much. So you don't see the equal. You don't see those type of programs because stations aren't being pushed to do it. Unless a community pushes a station, they're not going to do it.
Yeah, and if you don't know, Bill Whitaker was a reporter here
And Ron
probably
Allen,
20 years
Ron
ago.
Allen is still on MSNBC and NBC. They both started at WBTV.
So, but would you guys grade the call I did at the beginning?
Excuse me, Tanya.
Sorry.
We're gonna have to end this.
Okay.
We'll have to
Because
talk
we end at
later.
9:45. We've got Crispin and Laura will be the last person asking questions. If you have announcements, you can give them to Steve. Okay. Crispin?
Good morning. Was it a time that you ever just felt emotionally drained from reporting stories and how completely diverse? Like just emotionally drained from reporting stories?
Well, I remember, I wouldn't say it was emotionally, but it was definitely draining doing a story. I mean, and as a reporter, you see good stuff, but you see bad stuff too. I mean, I remember the 3-year-old that went through the windshield of a car and I had to cover it. And I remember the woman whose body was found in the woods 2 weeks later after she died, and that is a smell you will never forget. I had to come home and put my clothes in the cleaners. It just was in the air. So there are a lot of gruesome things that you see that you'd rather not. I remember as a newspaper reporter doing a story about a man who had stopped a woman, a baby to death with platform shoes when they were popular back in the 70s. So it can be very draining. Yeah.
I'll just say there are many times when you get drained and for many different reasons. It may not be the actual thing you're working on. It could be the environment, the politics. There's a lot of reasons, but you just have to stay strong and keep going and try to help the next person.
I went to cover a explosion in Shelby. There had been a man who had a business and it wasn't going well, and he was going to set it on fire so he could get the insurance money. And he did that, and the explosion, when his business caught on fire, there were some firefighters and some gas employees who had gone in to make sure everything's all right, and it exploded and took out a whole block. And when we got there that night, the silence, all of these people were standing around that block in downtown Shelby, and I'm watching grown men, old men, tears just meeting, and not a word. Nobody was saying a word. Everybody around there knew one of those people who had died in that fire. And yet they were so accommodating to us as a news crew. They opened up a building and let us get on top to get the pictures and everything. But they were all crying. Nobody was saying anything. I'm watching people just rocking and crying. I did the story. I stopped by my parents' house in Clinton Park. I put my head in my mama's lap and I just. So there are things that we see and go through, and there's nothing you could do. There was nothing I could do to comfort anybody. And I just went to my mama.
Laura?
Okay, my question, 30 seconds. Local news opposed to national news or worldwide news. Just give us a quick opinion of who you admire nationally in terms of who you would look at first or who you would follow based on their integrity or the way they're producing, and nationally. If each one of you can share that.
Locally, hands down, Steve Crump. Nationally, Bill Whitaker, and probably, I can't think of the guy's name that does ABC Nightline right now. I'm drawing a blank on his name. No, no, the black guy that does, yeah,
The anchor.
yeah, yeah.
Lester Holt.
No, he's
We'll come
on,
back around to it.
yeah, hopefully I'll think of it.
And I honestly, 30 seconds is hard for me to say exactly.
30 seconds was for my
Question.
I'm sorry. I can't say somebody exactly. I like I said, I switch between local ABC and NBC. I do enjoy their reporting. Nationally, I like CBS, Gail King's crew. And I know the other networks are bigger and do more fancy stuff. They're smaller. They're still the lowest in terms of the ratings, but I like more serious news, I guess.
CBS Sunday Mornings has been
Absolutely.
my show.
Yes, that's the
Since
best.
In 60 Minutes, and Bill Whitaker is definitely another good one.
Right.
Yeah.
So those are the two for me. 60 Minutes since I was a little kid, and we had one television, and it was on opposite Wonderful World of Disney. And my parents told my brothers and sisters, if she gonna learn something, y'all finna watch that. And that's what we watched.
But my only problem with 60 Minutes, and I keep saying I'm gonna write a letter. Maybe some of you may write a letter. Why have they never had an African American female? That bothers me. All this time, don't tell me you can't find someone. I mean, I could say that on a lot of different situations, but
And the only one, Nancy Giles, comes close, but they'll have her on CBS Sunday morning.
and Oprah did a stint, but
Yeah,
no,
but that's it.
They need a full-time African American.
Good observation.
Thank you so much for coming today. We appreciate it. And look, I'm gonna give you 15 seconds
Thank
each to close out.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank y'all so much for having us. Thank you for never forgetting us. Thank you for wanting to know this information, because too often people don't want to know. They just want to move on to the next. It's like 15 seconds in the brain and then it's gone. So thank you for wanting to know knowledge.
Yes, thank you all. Are you done?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all again for having us. And I just wanted to do a public service announcement. I can't help myself. I still love freelance writing, and there's a project I'm working on now. I'm ashamed to talk about it because I've been working on this book for about 12 years. But after losing my mother, father, sister, brother, mother-in-law, and other friends and family, I'm working on a book about the importance of having the conversation of end-of-life issues, do your paperwork, and live a happy life. That's a whole nother, you could have a whole nother morning on that. But we need to talk more and be ready and live the best life you can while you can. So I'm sorry, I just had to put that announcement in there.
That was very important. I too would like to thank Laura and thank Jackie and the Tuesday morning group for having us. And I'd like to encourage you, as you are watching your local station or even national, if you see something you like, call and tell them or write a letter. If you see something you don't like, they need to hear that even more so, because that's really how sometimes changes are made. They do pay attention to those. Like I think B said, they don't have to worry about the FCC rules where they would have to have these programs that they did I think once a year or every 2 years. But your opinion does matter. So if you have something that you see and you like or don't like, please let somebody know. You can look up the local number or go online and find it and give them a call.
And if you really want to make them nervous, call a station and say, I'd like to see your public record. Every station, radio and television station, is supposed to keep a public record of what they do. Call and ask them to see the public record to see if somebody will call you back and go, what would you like to? I want to see it all. I want to know what you've been doing the last couple of years. You get your license renewed every 3 years. I want to see what you've been doing for the last 3 years. What did you do locally? You will get their attention.
And you have a voice.
Again, thank you. And for those of you who have announcements, you can give those announcements to Steve, except we need Carlenia to give one announcement about the superintendent search engagement meetings.
Thank you. Before I do that, I think you guys did announce that we have people who are watching.
Yes.
And I received a text from a couple of them and said, I'm watching online. And what they're saying is powerful. Please put it in, please let them know these women are amazing. They are perfect. They're very powerful.
Oh,
So I
thank
think
you.
that this person is really saying what we're all feeling right now. You guys are amazing. So thank you. On Wednesday, there is going to be a meeting to search, give information to the search firm that is looking for a new superintendent for CMS. And that's at Weeping Willow at 6 o'clock. On Thursday the 9th at Rita Memorial at 6 o'clock, they will do the same thing. Before we've asked individuals who look like me to come and provide input, and we've had 3 or 4 people show up. I'm begging you, I'm asking you to tell your friends and family to please attend one of these sessions, because it is very important for you to speak for your children, your grandchildren, but also for the community, because there are people who are voiceless and who will not have the opportunity. So we need, so please try to attend one of these sessions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you again. You've got about 5 minutes in this room, but you have conversations outside if you'd like. Again, thank you for coming to the Fair State Subject Committee.